Welcome to the cul-de-sac.
Thanks.
Good. Hope it's not too hot for you. Been a little toasty today, hasn't it?
It's too warm to wear a jacket,
Yeah,
as you can see.
for sure.
Hi, my name's Paul. This is my 1977 Moto Guzzi Le Mans. I've owned this bike since '87. I bought it with 15,000 miles. It was my only motorcycle from '87 to 2002. I did everything with it: touring, commuting, dating. Rode it on the track for not necessarily track days, but parade laps. And between '87 and 2002, put 170,000 miles on it. 2002, I finally got myself another bike. It was a 95 Ducati 900 Super Sport. And that allowed me to do something I've been wanting to do with this bike for a long time. That was to take it apart. Because in taking it apart, I found that every piece of the bike needed replacement or refurbishing, repainting, repair. Everything needed fixing up in one way or another. So I took it down to the bare frame, and it sat in pieces for about 18 years, from 2002 to 2020. Finally, in 2020, I was stuck at home with the pandemic, nothing to do, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. So I finally had space and time and money to dive in and put the bike back together. So I started out with powder coating the frame, powder coating the wheels, replacing many things. Matthew Ark, Spark Moto, he built a wire harness. He did something really cool here. The original fuses were the old bullet type fuses, like they used on Volkswagens. Here we have modern spade fuses, which are much more reliable than the old bullet type fuses. They fasten in more securely, they don't vibrate themselves loose, and they're easy to find anywhere. Now, although I've made that all so convenient, ever since I did finish putting the bike back together again, I haven't had to replace a fuse, so kind of a moot point. The bodywork was painted by Anthony Michel Motomp, who used to run Bridge City Cycles. He did the body paint. I was able to find decals brand new. I was able to find these badges brand new. The turn signals are the old type. By today's standards, they're big and ugly, but that's what they used in the 70s. They called it the standard issue Italian taillight. And if you look at Ducatis, Vespas, Lambrettas, Motomarinis, all the Italian bikes, scooters, and motorcycles had the same taillight because that's all that Italy offered. The fairing's original, painted all red. I never cared for the day-glow orange accent that the original fairing had. I searched and I found the original mirrors and replacements for the original waffle grips. I added these fork boots. I like them. I think they look good and they protect the forks from dirt and from rock chips. I added on a Telefix fork brace. Serious Guzzisti will point out that I put my brakes on wrong, because the original brakes were mounted on the front of the forks rather than the rear. This was intentional, because when you look at modern motorcycles, you'll see they have the brakes mounted on the rear of the forks. This way, the rotors are pushing against the forks instead of pulling away from the forks. It's better braking. One of the things that took a while to get me started was putting the engine back together, because I got the crank machined for new bearings. That was at a local Portland machine shop. And even though I had that job done, I hadn't yet reassembled the engine. One day, my wife and I were talking, and she asked me what I was going to do with all those old junk motorcycle parts cluttering up the garage. And I told her that I was going to put the bike back together again. And she asked me, what's the first thing you need to do to get started on that? I said, well, that would be putting the engine together. She asked me if I should pay a mechanic to do that, since I wasn't doing it. And I said, if I did that, I wouldn't be rebuilding my own bike. And at that point she said, well, you've been sitting on these parts for 10 or 15 years. You've shown that you're not rebuilding your own bike. So she talked me into having a mechanic assemble the engine. PDX Moto Factory. He put the engine together, and once I had the engine together, then it was easy to get rolling with the rest of it. Next step was putting the engine into the frame. After putting the engine into the frame, putting on the forks and the wheels. I've done a lot of touring with the bike. Before the restoration, I rode this on 2 trips to Colorado, plus an additional trip to Utah. I rode it many trips to Idaho, into British Columbia, many trips to California to go watch racing. at Laguna Seca, so a lot of trips to California. Of course, Oregon and Washington. I've been a member of the Vintage Motorcycle Enthusiasts in Washington since 1988, so I've always been going to the Isle of Vashon TT. I've been a member of the Moto Guzzi Club since I first got the bike. At the time that I joined the Moto Guzzi Club, I was one of the younger members and one of the very few who had a Le Mans. Most of the Moto Guzzi people were riding touring bikes, Californias, Eldorados. They were always impressed with the Le Mans. They thought it was cool. I thought it was cool. This is a 77 Moto Guzzi Le Mans. It's what some people would call the Le Mans 1. There never was anything called Le Mans 1. It is the original Le Mans. It was actually built in 76. So if we were to look at the VIN plate, it shows that it was built in June of 76. They made the original version of the Le Mans through 79, and then in 1980 they came out with the Le Mans 2 in Europe. Here in the United States they sold a model called the CX100, and then came the Model 3, Model 4, Model 5. The Le Mans was developed after the V7 Sport and the 750S. So the V7 Sport was Moto Guzzi's first intentional cafe racer or sport bike. That came out in 71, and the V7 Sport was their first bike that had what they called the Tonti frame. So a designer or engineer by the name of Lino Tonti came out with this particular frame that was in use from 71 through close to the year 2000. One of the things you'll notice with Tonti frame, if you look at the line on the gas tank and the line here under the seat and the line of the fender, you'll notice a horizontal line here. It's a very long frame, which means it's very comfortable. And this frame is used not only on the Le Mans, a sport bike, but it was also used on their touring bikes. In 71, Moto Guzzi came out with the V7 Sport, which was a 750. It had a similar engine, similar frame. It had the same fuel tank. It had drum brakes on the front and the rear. It had chrome fenders. That was a nice looking bike, the V7 Sport, and it's a cherished bike. Moto Guzzi's first V-twin sport bike. After the V7 Sport, they came out with the 750S. The 750S was an upgrade over the V7 Sport because it had front disc brakes, but it still had the rear drum brake. Later on, they came out with a model called the 750S3, which had 3 disc brakes, as this does. So the 750S and the 750S3 were made, I think, around 1974, 75. So in 76, they came out with the Le Mans model. Compared to the 750S, the Le Mans got the bikini fairing, fiberglass fenders, front and rear, not plastic, fiberglass, upswept mufflers, the 850cc engine, the clip-on handlebars as opposed to a handlebar mounted on top of the triple clamp. Moto Guzzi referred to that as their serious cafe racer. The wheels are original. They're a solid aluminum wheel. They referred to them as mag wheels. The earlier models, the V7 Sport and the 750S, they had spoked wheels. On this bike, the original were silver. I had them powder coated with the gold. I like the way that the gold on the wheels matches the gold in the logo. Had a mechanic who put the engine together. However, he honed out the cylinders and he went a little too far with that. So it was blowing oil. I removed the cylinders, took them to Les Barker, Little Engine Service. We were able to keep the same pistons, but just new rings and new cylinder sleeves. So Les removed the old cylinder sleeves, put in the new cylinder sleeves, machined everything, honed everything, got everything prepared. And then he handed me the finished cylinders and the pistons and the rings and told me to go home and put it all back together again. So I did that. Of course, I rebuilt the carburetors. After 170,000 miles, the old transmission did not need any work. It's still as bulletproof as ever. So I just bolted it on and put it on. Moto Guzzi uses a transverse V-twin engine. We were talking earlier, I describe it as a cross between a BMW Boxer and a Harley Davidson. BMW Boxers also have a transverse engine, so the cylinders stick out the sides. It is similar to a Harley in that it's a V-twin. However, it's different from a Harley in that both cylinders cool equally. And then because the engine is laid out that way and the crank is spinning this way as opposed to this way, the crank is attached directly to a drive shaft. And the drive shaft is inside the swing arm. In that respect, it's like a BMW Boxer or also like a Honda Goldwing. The shaft drive is reliable. I replaced a U-joint once at about 100,000 miles. Then as I was rebuilding the bike, I put in brand new U-joints just because I was already in there. Compared to chains and sprockets, the drive shaft and the U-joints are quite durable. It's a little bit more work to replace a U-joint than it is to replace a chain. However, they last a long time. So I think most people find that the U-joints will last between 70 to 100,000 miles, or maybe even more than that. And it's not a difficult job to replace a U-joint. It's basically nuts and bolts. It's a Corbin saddle. I originally bought the Corbin saddle in 1987 when I went to the Laguna Seca racetrack. And the original owner of the company, Mike Corbin, was at the track pushing his Corbin saddles, talking about how they're comfortable and durable. And he hadn't made a saddle for a Moto Guzzi Le Mans at that point, so I went to the factory and he made the saddle for my bike. He was pushing this old waffle pattern vinyl, which was supposed to allow for some ventilation, get your flesh up off the seat and allow air to go through. That waffle pattern vinyl is not being used anymore. It's not very durable. Going back to 2020, when I was restoring the bike, I sent the saddle into the Corbin factory in California, and they just reupholstered it with leather as opposed to the vinyl. So this is a leather seat. I also cut down the passenger seat and did this Cafe Racers bump stop. Moto Guzzi started in 1921. Moto Guzzi has a long history of racing up through the 50s and into the 60s. For the first 50 years, Moto Guzzi was more known for their single-cylinder bikes with the cylinder sticking out the front. They did various engine sizes from 125s to 500, maybe 600 cc's. They were also known for having what they called a bacon slicer flywheel. So those old single-cylinder Guzzis had the flywheels on the outside of the engine sitting right next to your leg. In reality, it didn't have any sharp edges, so it wasn't going to slice your calf. But it was fun to look at this flywheel sitting on the exterior of the engine, spinning right next to your leg. Those 500cc single-cylinder Guzzis had a very successful racing history for the first 50 years. Moto Guzzi came out with their Transverse V Twin. The first one was developed during World War II, and it was used in a off-road vehicle. It was kind of a cross between a three-wheeler, like an ATV, and a tractor. And it was intended to be used in the mountains and in the snow. And it had tractor-type tracks on the rear end. They could also put a ski on the front end. It was an early version of a snowmobile. The V-twin engine was intended to have a lot of torque and climb mountains. So it was a slow-revving, high-torque engine. And it's because of that early history that Moto Guzzi now has the nickname of being an old tractor. So after World War II, Moto Guzzi set aside that project. It wasn't necessary anymore. In 1967, they came out with their Transverse V engine, and the first bike was simply called the V7. It was what we would call a standard motorcycle. It wasn't necessarily aimed as a sport bike or a race bike or a touring bike, but it turned out to be very versatile. And people did use them for touring. People did use them for racing. After their first V7 from 1967, they came out with the Ambassador, which could be used as a touring bike, and it was also used in Italy for police duty. Then later on, they would come out with the Eldorado, which was also intended as a touring bike and used for police duty. Sometime at the early 70s, the California Highway Patrol approached Moto Guzzi and asked if they could make a bike specifically for police duty. California Highway Patrol, or CHIPS, they had some specific desires that they wanted out of the police bike. And Moto Guzzi fulfilled their wish, and that was the model that became known as the California. That police bike was the foundation for many other Moto Guzzi touring bikes that came after. So at home, I also have a 2002 Moto Guzzi Le Mans. Now that bike doesn't look very much like this at all. It's got a big bullet fairing on it. It's a 1100cc. It's a Transverse V-twin, but it's a totally new engine. And I recently got another couple of Moto Guzzis. I got a California 2 touring bike, which is quite a bit different from this. My son recently graduated from engineering school, so he's now an aerospace engineer. So as his graduation gift and combination birthday gift, I gave him that 2002 Le Mans. So my son and I now have matching Le Manses, mine being the 77, his being the 2002. So I've had the bike for so long. I'm absolutely going to keep it. I have no desire ever to sell it. And it's written up specifically in my will to go to my son whenever the time comes. I just hope that he will appreciate a vintage bike the same way that I do. Being a vintage bike, I'll tell you, it's a little bit weird to ride. Of course, most of the people watching this video are fans of vintage motorcycles. This is difficult to ride. First of all, I'll point out that for a sport bike, the seating position is pretty comfortable. The foot pegs are rear set, but certainly not rear set as much as a modern sport bike. The clip-on handlebars are low and forward, but not quite as low and forward as modern sport bikes. The carburetors have heavy throttle springs, so it takes some effort to twist the throttle. The clutch has heavy clutch springs, so it takes some effort to squeeze the clutch. And if you're in a traffic jam, it's awful. It's pretty terrible. The shifter is clunky. You really should be wearing heavy-duty boots when you're going to be shifting, because it's a lot of pressure on the toes. And then when you're at a stop, it's not terribly easy to find neutral, but it can be done. It's more difficult to ride than a modern bike. So that's my plan, to keep the bike for as long as I live, and then it goes to my son. It's, like I said, it's specifically written up in the will to go to him.
Thanks very much for watching, guys. This has been another tale from the cul-de-sac. Please remember to subscribe and click the little bell and you'll get a notice whenever I release a new video, usually every Sunday morning and sometimes during the week. Just say hi, my name's Paul, something like that.
You meet the weirdest people on a Guzzi.
That's great.